Alright, so welcome to Model 8591. This release is based on a series of digital pianos and synthesizers that came out in the years 1985 through 1991 by one of the big Japanese keyboard manufacturers. And it all started with a model that was used heavily by artists like Elton John and very few others, because at the time it was huge and expensive and heavy, and very few people could afford it, and it was very much considered a pro model. So this company very shortly afterward released a rack mount version, and that piano module became known around the world and used by a ton of people in pop, rock, R&B, gospel circles, because at the time it was the only thing that could really come close to recreating the sound and behavior of an acoustic piano. At the time, everything was really limited. Keyboards didn't have the kind of memory and CPU power necessary to hold big piano samples. So this digital piano came out, and it took the world by storm. So anyway, I'm going to jump through the patch list here. I'm going to start in the middle. You'll see these numbers. If you go at the top, you'll see 85, and then 86, and then 91. Those represent the years that we're dealing with here. So these pianos, starting with MKS piano 1, 2, 3, and then electric piano 1 and 2, these are really the centerpiece of the library. These are based on this Japanese digital piano. And so I'm going to start here. And what you'll notice, first thing, and by the way, the version of the concert that I've got open, 8591 comes with a couple different versions. There's the main one. There's the one that comes with the chorus samples. If you've installed those, they're optional. And then there's the version for DX Dreams owners. That's the one that I've got loaded here. And everything is identical among all three, with two exceptions. The DX Dreams version has 5 combo patches at the end, which will only work if you've got DX Dreams installed. And then there are the dedicated chorus versions, which you won't find in this version I've got called up. Other than that, they're identical. So let's start here with MKS Piano 1. Now this is just a mono sound. So it was captured in mono because the original was mono. So by today's standards, in 2021, this does not sound really at all like a real piano. But again, it was the only thing that even came close. And as you'll see here in a minute, it's possible to really dial in some really unique sounds with these sounds. So here's piano 1. So, you hit some of these lower notes. It does sound piano-like, even though it's not based on samples. It has the dynamics and the power of a real grand piano. So that's what guys loved about it. Here's piano 2. This one's a little bit more mid-range heavy. Not a whole lot of difference between 1 and 2. That one cuts a little bit more. Here's 2 again. And then 3 is pretty radically different. This one was meant to mimic an electric piano that Yamaha put out called the CP70. And that's the sound that you would have heard quite a bit in songs like this. And this one is again, it's very different than the other two. So anyway, the main thing that sets 8591 apart from other companies that have tried to recreate these sounds is that I took a no compromise approach. There's another company I'm a big fan of, actually. I won't say their name, but they have a large keyboard sample library that a lot of people use. It's very popular. And they also included samples of this iconic piano module. However, because these sounds were just a part of that much bigger library, they, by necessity, had to make some sacrifices. One of them is in sample time. If you put them back to back, and I actually have a separate video that I'll post a link to where I do a comparison, they end up cutting their samples of this sound at about 15 seconds, and then they're faded. So now that's actually probably okay for most people. I mean, it's not a huge deal breaker because very few people are going to hold a chord for longer than 15 seconds. But my approach with this library is that I wanted you to be able to use this interchangeably with the hardware. If you're one of those guys that really cares about the tiniest details, that's what I was going for. So when I recorded these samples, I recorded all the way to the end to where these sounds naturally completely decayed. And in most cases, that ends up being around 36 seconds. And I sampled chromatically every key across the entire 88-note range. So that's one thing that sets 85901 apart from the competition, is everything is sampled to the maximum degree possible. There's also a lot of velocity layers. Each sound might be slightly different. It just depended. I did a lot of A/B testing with the hardware to make sure that when you played one and you played the other, you could not tell a difference. So that's really it in a nutshell. That's my philosophy, is I didn't want to have any limits, because the other thing is this hardware is, 30, even 40 years old in some cases, and it's getting harder and harder to find, and especially in good condition. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to really come as close as possible to owning the real hardware, including every little quirk. So back to the sounds themselves. These sounds, they are what they are. 100% faithful, but in this form, as they come out of the hardware, they're mono. So what do you do about that? I'm going to take you over to the iPad now and show you a couple things. This screen that's called up right now, this is the same screen that comes with DX Dreams. It's the same editor. The colors are different because I try to get them a little closer to the color scheme in 8591, but it's the same thing. Problem with this is on an iPad, that's the standard iPad is 9.5 inches diagonal. The controls are really tiny, and there's no way around that. So it's usable. You've got 8 channel strips, each one with mute, solo, reverb, dream verb, delay, semitune, fine tune, volume, and then the 3 chorus parameters. But new to 8591 is a new layer that's dedicated to just the main channel strip. So this gives you everything that's here and spreads it out in a much easier to use control. So let's play with this a little bit. If you have the chorus samples installed, you'll be able to hear those, and that's captured in true stereo. However, if you don't have the chorus samples installed, there are plenty of ways to get around that. First and foremost, the chorus plugin that comes with Logic and MainStage is actually really, really good, and it can get extremely close to the original sound of the chorus chip in the hardware. So, really easy to get to. All you got to do is turn up the chorus control. So this is basically a wet-dry control. All the way down, it's off. All the way up, it's all the way on. So, and that's a little artificially wide. So usually somewhere around the middle. Now, you hear it's got a little bit of a swirly aspect to it. The rate control is what's going to affect that. So let's play with that. This is approaching the standard chorus sound that you would hear on an MKS. But you can get extreme with it too. This is basically an LFO control for the chorus chip. And then depth. So here we go. Now we've got our chorus. This is pretty close to what you'd hear on the actual hardware. But what if you don't want pretty close? What if you want exact? Well, you can load the chorus samples, or another alternative is you can go under the hood, take out the chorus plugins that I've got instantiated, and you can use, what I would recommend is the TAL, T-A-L. I think it's called the Juno 60 chorus. Oh, shoot, I forget. I'll put a link to it in the description of the video below. But the TAL makes a Juno chorus, which is the exact same model that's in the MKS hardware. That will give you the exact chorus sound. I've actually A-B'd it. I've got a separate video of that. It's fantastic. So if you want the real thing without having all the samples, then you can do that. You can load the optional chorus plugin by TAL, and it's free. The Roland Zenology plugin from Roland Cloud is another option, and that one's not free, but if you've got Roland Cloud, that has some fantastic chorus models. So you got 4 different options. You've got the native chorus that comes with Logic and MainStage, which is absolutely amazing. It sounds, you know, it's really hard to tell the difference, but it's not exact. And it actually gives you more options than you would get on the hardware. You can't play with some of these other things on the hardware like you can here. So you got that. The second option is the TAL plugin, which is free. The third option is another third-party chorus. And the fourth option is downloading the chorus samples that come with Model 8591. The only downside to that is the size that they take. That'll add about 18 gigabytes to the size of the library. So it just depends what your priorities are. Personally, I'm really happy with the built-in chorus. I think it does the job. It in a mix, you would never be able to tell the difference. And it gives you some flexibility that you don't have with the original. So that's kind of where I lean. So let's check out the other two and dial in some chorus. And then piano 3. Another thing to know is that I actually spent time with the hardware, set the other 2 parameters to closely match the hardware as much as possible, so that all you have to do is increase the chorus amount, and that's going to get you pretty much there. But you do have the options. You can change these as much as you want. So now let's go a little further. There's no reverb obviously at the moment, so let's turn on the reverb. And that might be a little too much, so you can just dial that back a little bit. That's regular reverb. Here's the dream verb. Okay, and then you've got the delay. Oops, got to turn it up. And like DX Streams, you also have 2 reverb options. By default, it's set to Hall. Let's turn it off and turn on the AMS reverb, which comes with 8591. Comes with the 3 custom impulses that I sampled from the AMS reverb. Oops, we've got to turn on the reverb. Now you'll notice this reverb has a much shorter and non-linear decay. And that's a crucial sound from the 80s. I mean, everything was run through that AMS reverb back then. Here's the difference. It's AMS. hall. You hear the hall just kind of decays naturally. Here's AMS. Okay, so those are our two reverbs. Now, another thing that's new to 8591 is your EQ controls and your compression. DX Dreams did not have that by default, so this is new to the BackStage Pass series. And the reason I did this is because the MKS hardware has an EQ in it, and a lot of guys liked to dial in their own custom piano sounds using that EQ. And it can get pretty big and pretty powerful. So let's go back to piano 1. You'll see that EQ is turned on by default, but it's set flat. So there's no difference when you turn it on or off. So let's add some bass. It just becomes monstrous. Let's bypass the EQ. That's without it. That's with it. So let's scoop out a little mid-range. That's going to give us kind of a pinched smiley face curve. But we've got two different mid-range controls. We've got width, which is how wide the boost and cut is going to be. And then we've got the frequency that we're boosting or cutting. There's without our EQ. There's with it. Now let's let's add some treble. By default, the frequency, which you can't really see the numbers here because it's mapped internally, it's set to 10K, which is the same as the default in the hardware, in the MKS module. But if you crank the frequency down a little bit, you get into the upper mid-range. Whew, that'll tear your head off. But at reasonable levels, let's turn off the EQ. Turn it back on. It just makes a massive, powerful sound. So now we turn the reverb back on. And now we're getting into Peter Gabriel territory. The sound that you'll hear later. Massive power, the low end. If you heard this sound in a large stadium or an arena back in the 80s, you knew it. It just dominated a mix. And it just sounds absolutely huge. All that just from dialing in some EQ. There's without it. And there's with it. And let's put a little chorus back in. We're getting a ton of low-end build up there. Yeah, so I mean, kind of instant soundtrack just from playing with these parameters, and that's just one sound. All right, so those are the three acoustic piano-oriented sounds from the MKS from 1986. Let's check out the electric pianos. Again, very iconic, but by itself, without any effects, it's, you know, so-so. So let's bring in some chorus. And some reverb. This sound was used a ton, along with its stablemate, lack of a better word, MKS Piano 2. This one has more sparkle, more high end. And let's add some more. Again, always used with chorus, this sound. The other thing is this sound was used a ton layered with the Yamaha DX7 or the TX816, you know, and I'll show you some examples of that later. But this electric piano sound was a staple in 80s and early 90s. Even to this day, especially in R&B, gospel circles, you still hear this sound a lot. So those are the 5 core sounds that really started the idea of Model 8591. They're based on that Japanese digital piano that is just really iconic. To this day, it's still highly sought after. And so that's kind of what started it all. So now let's jump back to the top of the patch list, and I'm going to show you a couple other things in order. So the numbers you see, 85, 86, 91, those are the years that we're dealing with. So 85, all the patches that start with 85 come from an analog synthesizer, also made by this Japanese company. And it was not a piano or digital piano. It was an analog synth, so it was not known for piano sounds, but it did make some really cool keyboard type sounds. And ironically, one of the sounds it really mimics well is the Yamaha GS1 and GS2, which were kind of hybrids. It was essentially a predecessor to the DX7, so it was kind of a half digital piano, half synthesizer. It used FM synthesis to create its sounds, and I just kind of thought it was interesting. It's kind of a cross-pollination between, you know, Yamaha and this other manufacturer. So here is almost a GS1. Let's turn off that monster reverb and delay. Again, not a piano or electric piano, but it's a keyboard sound, and it's warm. It's got this analog aspect to it. And it's very dynamic. It's just a sound I've always really liked. It works really well as a layer with other sounds. Let's switch to the AMS. So that's that. Bonsai Tree is, I'm not sure why I called it that. It just, again, very dreamy, atmospheric with the effects on. Another sound that's great, layered with other things, but even by itself, it just does some cool stuff. Let's turn off the effects so you can hear it by itself. So yeah, there you go. There's Bonsai Tree. Wood and metal. Almost, it kind of reminds me of like a log drum. If you made a piano out of a log drum. Again, let's turn everything off. There you go. That's wood and metal. And again, you start playing with effects and you get all kinds of other things. Kind of cool. It almost has it sounds like it has a pad behind it, but it doesn't. That's just what happens when the sound decays. So moving on, here are two more GS impersonations by this analog synth. This kind of is a hybrid between an electric piano that's almost from the 70s maybe. Here's GS2 number 2. Very, very similar, it just happens to have all the stuff on it. Again, these sounds, they're made to be so dynamic. So, there you go. Okay, so moving on to the CP pianos. These, I'm not sure how to describe these other than to say that these are more piano-like sounds that come from that analog synth from 1985. And again, it's kind of interesting because this synth, it was really not, it's not intended for piano sounds. It really excelled at pads and synth brass and conventional synthesizer sounds. So the fact that it happened to make some pretty decent electric piano sounds is pretty cool. So there's the mono version. Here's the version recorded in stereo. It was basically 2 layers of the same sound, panned apart and slightly detuned from each other. And it has a pretty decent low end to it. And some of these, they almost sound like sounds from the 70s or even the 60s, like not quite a Wurlitzer, but definitely could pass for that era, of sound in terms of being a primitive electric piano. Supermod is the same thing, but just with more of a chorusy modulation aspect to it. All right, moving on, JX piano. This one's a little bit more of a pure sound. Let's turn off the verb. Okay, now we talked about EQ with the MKS sounds. What we didn't talk about is compression. Let me go back to that for a second. Let's go back to MKS Piano 3. It's back to its factory state. This is how it sounds coming out of the hardware. But a lot of guys would run these sounds through a compressor, especially an optical compressor, to make it have more of a smack, more of a punchy, in-your-face, powerful sound. So to do that, this actually does have a little bit of compression on it. Let me turn it off. There it is, completely no compression at all. If I turn the compression all the way up, it's going to sound louder because what it's doing is it's compressing the dynamic range. So it's taking quiet sounds, making them loud, loud sounds, making them, quiet. So the whole dynamic range is lowered, but it sounds louder. Now, the ratio control is going to take that even further. That's the amount of compression that's being applied. Now all of a sudden we have this really smacked, punchy, in your face. It's louder, but if we turn it off, this is basically just a mix control for the compression. You hear what it's doing to the attack? It's squeezing it. So that's new in Model 8591, having the compressor controls, and you also see it on screen here up in the top right. It's just a nice way of giving you some more dynamic control. And I've got my preferences set so that when I change presets, it goes back to the factory default. But that's how you get to compression. So let's go back to where we were. We were at JX Piano. Let's turn off the verb, and let's crank up the compression a little bit. That kind of gets us in a little funky territory. So yeah, there you go. There's the compression. Moving on, Rubber Band EP. Let's bypass the effects so we can hear it dry. Almost sounds like it has like a Jupiter 8 kind of pad behind it. But it's not. It's just part of the sound. This was a sound that was also popular in the 80s. It was used as a layer, with things like the DX7 electric piano sound or the MKS module. I called it Rubber Band EP because it kind of has it sounds like you're plucking a big rubber band. I used to love doing that as a kid, taking a big rubber band and plucking it next to my ear. It sounded like that. So that's Rubber Band EP. All right, Shadows of a DX. It's kind of ironic because this is an analog synth with really bright digital sounding overtones. Kind of remarkable. Turn off the effects. Yeah, there you go. And of course, you can even add more. Emphasize all that sparkly high end. And let's put on the AMS verb. So that's Shadows of a DX. All right, now we've been through the 5 MKS sounds, so let's move down to the bottom of the list. Entering the 90s. You'll see the 91 here. These 4 sounds come from a digital synth that this Japanese manufacturer put out in 1991, and it was kind of an interesting time. You know, all through the 80s, you had the DX series dominating everything, and they had no controls on them. Everything was programmed by buttons and menus, and it had this flat panel. It was very futuristic looking, and it got to the point where everybody was missing all the controls of an analog synth, all the knobs and faders and buttons and all that kind of stuff. So this company put out a digital synth with an interface that looked analog. It had all these controls on it, and it was a beautiful synth. But it was very, very crystalline and hi-fi and glassy sounding, especially the electric pianos. It had two in particular electric piano sounds that were very sparkly, and they were used a lot. You heard them all over the place. Again, layered with other things. But here are a couple of the sounds that I created in that synth. And those of you who were around in the early 90s, you'll remember this stuff. Super bright and cutting. So that's entering the 90s, and that's that sound is layered, you know, inside of itself. There's you know, acoustic piano sound in there. There's electric piano, the sparkly digital thing. It was a sound that was used a lot in those days, and a lot of people still want it. So there you go. Ice crystals. This is another sound that was very well known from this synthesizer. And what I did is I took the initial sound, I duplicated it, panned it hard left, hard right, slightly detuned it, made this kind of big super stereo version of it. The original factory version was quite different. Same basic sound, but it was mono, and it just had stereo effects on it. This is actually a true stereo representation of that sound. And then there's two variations on it. Modular crystals is the same thing, but with a lot of modulation, chorusy type sounds. And that's baked into the sound. That's not using the chorus effects or anything. This is, you know, captured that way from the hardware. And dream crystals, similar idea, but more soundscapey. Okay, so those are all the core sounds in 85-91. Starting back at 1985, you got all these, then you get into 1986 with the digital piano, and then 1991 with the sparkly electric piano stuff. So not a ton of core sounds, but what's there is so extremely meticulously captured that, again, you could put it next to the original hardware and not be able to tell a difference. There are no compromises. The sample time is complete. The velocity layers are adequate to faithfully capture the originals, and they were recorded really, really well through British mic preamps. You know, processed the same way you would process the originals, so they sound fantastic. They play really, really well. One note that's really important, you're going to want to take time with your MIDI controller to experiment with velocity curves, because these sounds are so very dynamic. all of the dynamics of the originals were captured. So you're going to want to make sure to spend some time, make sure that your master controller is sending a velocity curve that ties in with this really well. You can also do it in MainStage itself. You can go under the hood there. There's ways to play with that, and but that's important to do because you want to get the most out of these sounds. Okay, so let's move on to the combo patches. There are a handful, I forget what the number is here, maybe 20, 25, something like that. And these are just a handful of combos that will give you some ideas. That's not an exact duplicate of the original, but it's very, very similar, and it's meant to evoke the idea. Here's another one. Anyway, you get the idea. So this one is made up of 3 different layers. On channel strip 1, you've got an acoustic piano, and any of these that have acoustic piano in, that's just a factory MainStage piano, just to give you the idea. And then it's layered with, if we solo that channel, there's the MKS EP2, and then there's one of the GS1 sounds from 8591. So all 3 together. There's your combo. So again, just an idea. Here's another example of one that does not sound exactly like the original, but it's similar. It's meant to evoke the same idea. Again, this one is the MainStage piano with an EQ on it to make it sound, nasally like the original. There's the MKS EP layer and one of the other EPs. So all together. That's that one. Secret World. This is one of my favorite patches. This is very much modeled after Peter Gabriel, who used this sound all over the place in the mid-90s. His Secret World tour, if you listen to the live record, you will hear this sound all over it. That's larger than life. I mean, that's meant to sound like, this is played in the Grand Canyon. But, a big stadium, a huge arena. This is, again, it's idealized, but it's that idea. But I like this because it shows how dynamic these sounds are. So that's that. Okay, Place in This World. Those of you who are familiar with my boss, Michael W. Smith, you will recognize this sound. He used this sound all over. This is 2 patches layered together. Here is just the MKS Piano 3 and the EP2. So that was a very popular sound all through the 90s, especially in CCM music. Okay, MKS layers. This is just what it sounds like, a couple different variations on two or more sounds layered together from the MKS. Let's go to number 2. And number 3. And then early 90s, layers 1. Here is early 90s, layers 2. All right, here we come to 4 sounds that are variations of an acoustic piano and EP layers from 8591. Here's number 2. Number 3. Number 4. So there you go. GS1 and EP layers. There's 2 of these. Here's number 2. These are kind of powerful. Okay, 3 decades collide. And Dreamweaver. These are obviously very cinematic. If you're listening closely or on headphones, you're hearing some noise in there. That's faithful. That's part of the original. That it was a noisy synthesizer, depending on the gain structure inside. But you know, in a track, unless you're playing it solo like that, it's really not an issue. But that's how the original sounds. And here's number 2. So there you go. Interesting sounds. Okay, last little bit. Like I said earlier, there are 3 versions of the concert file that comes with 8591. There is the complete version that includes patches that use the chorus samples, if you've downloaded those. There is the version without the chorus samples. Both of those are identical, other than the fact that some patches use the chorus samples and some don't. And the third version is for DX Streams users. If you've got DX Streams installed, this is the concert you should open. You'll see in the title bar at the top, Model 8591 for DX Streams. This comes with just 5 combination patches that make use of some of the iconic DX sounds. And you'll know them as soon as you hear them. So here we go. Here's Foster's Faves number 1. Here's number 2. This sound here might be the pinnacle of 80s and early 90s slick pop. I mean, it was just, I don't know how else to say it. It's the MKS piano, layers, also with the TX-816, which was 8 DX7s layered together. It was just a monstrous electric piano sound, and a lot of people loved it. Michael Jackson was a big fan of that too. Here's number 3. So yeah. All right, mid-80s staple. This one to me falls in a little bit on the cheesy side, but it's a sound that people used, so I included it. So you might find a use for it. Last one, this one's a little bit funky. It uses a sound from the TX-816 layered with the MKS sounds. This one has a unique ambience to it. That's because it taps into the AMS nonlinear reverb impulses that come with these libraries. I've always liked that sound. This is something you might have heard in some later Toto stuff. Sounds like something David Paich would do. So there you go. That is a run-through of the patches that come with Model 8591. It's not an exhaustive library like DX Streams. It's not full of all these iconic synth sounds. It's more of obviously a special purpose library that's meant to give you these very, very unique electric piano, synthetic piano sounds from 1985 through 1991. And until now, there's really nobody else that I know of anyway that's really captured all of these sounds to this degree of authenticity and extreme, what am I trying to say? Pickiness. I'm really picky about these sounds. I'm picky about the way they play. I wanted you to be able to have access to sounds that they're just really hard to come by these days. to get a lot of these sounds, especially the DX layers, you would have to have all of that original hardware, and it's getting hard to find in good condition. You'd have to have all the analog gear to capture it through, and you'd have to have the extremely expensive AMS reverb to give you some of those iconic sounds. So this is just my way of giving you access to sounds that are becoming increasingly hard to find, and most people aren't going to be able to have access to these sounds anymore. So here you go. I hope you enjoy these. I hope you can make use of these sounds and do something unique with them, and take them into the future, because they're very expressive, dynamic sounds, and you layer them with other things, and you can do some really cool stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. Feel free to ask questions in the comments below, but just know that I don't get to YouTube every day. So it might take me a bit to get back to you. You can always reach out to me on the website, which is backstagepass.store. And, there's ways there you can get in touch, and I would love to hear from you. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoy Model 8591, and stay in touch. Let me know what you want to hear next, what kind of products you want me to work on next. I've got several things in the pipeline, but until then, happy music making.